Good afternoon and welcome everyone to CPA Webinar BS476 Changes to Fire Testing, What You Need to Know. My name is Fabiola and I work as an Events and Membership Executive for the CPA. The government has consulted on a potential move from BS476 fire testing standard to the European standard EN 135011. This, without a doubt, will affect many stakeholders in the built environment. The BS476 is well known across the industry, and while some elements have some equivalence with the European standard, many do not. Many areas of the industry rely on the 476, while others question the equivalence of the European standard. Today, I will support on this webinar the CPA Chief Executive Peter Caplehorn, who will discuss its merits, problems, and possible solutions. I will also be joined by Niall Rowan, Technical Regulatory Affairs from the Association for Specialist Fire Protection. The presentation will last for about 30 minutes, and the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to answering your questions. So please feel free to type your queries in the Q&A box, and at the end of the presentation, I will be reading them out to our panelists. Before turning the floor over to Peter Caplehorn, I want to remind you all that this webinar will be recorded and the chat will be deactivated. However, I invite you all to type your questions again in the Q&A box. We hope to post our recording of the webinar on the CPA website within the next 48 hours. Thank you, and Peter, you can feel free to begin.
Good afternoon. I nearly trapped myself in that same position, actually, Fabi. It's still morning, so we're ahead of ourselves. So hello, everybody, which is probably a more easy term. And thank you for joining us for this presentation. And here we go.
Okay. Can you see them?
Yeah, that's super, Fabi. Thank you. So Fabi will drive the slides for me so I can focus on making sure that we're clear. So I've given a subtitle to this presentation of "We do not want another CA mark problem." But before I get into the detail, as this is an open seminar to members and non-members alike, I just thought quickly I'll describe the sector and the CPA. So we have a UK construction product sector that's worth more than 60 billion. Employs more than 330,000 people and is around 24,000 companies. So a big part of the construction sector, and therefore this sort of problem that we're discussing this morning is crucial in terms of how we address it, how we take it forward. Next slide, please, Fabi. Thank you very much. So the CPA are very pleased and proud to represent 85% of the product sector. And we do that in a number of ways across economics, across technical matters, across sustainability, and across digital matters, of course, as well. And for us, that's really important to make sure that we understand the sector, we make sure that the sector's voice is heard by government, and we make sure that the sector discusses all the key issues of the day as we go forward, as the industry develops. Lots of important issues. And of course, central to those at the moment is the building safety problem. We have had a programme since the Grenfell disaster of focusing in on lots of issues around building safety. Part of those have been changes to the building regs. And we will see later this year a significant change as the building safety regulator and the product safety regulator really come on stream. And the important thing for me to really emphasize to everybody, these changes affect everybody in the whole construction industry. This is not, as some have suggested, just about changes to high-rise, high-risk buildings. This is about the whole infrastructure of construction. And in particular, the regulators will be looking for a focus by the product sector on making sure that products are fit for purpose, making sure the information around them is correct. And of course, that is also being tracked by our new offering, the Code for Construction Product Information. And I'm sure some of you will have seen the webinars that we've been doing on that. But focusing in on what we're talking today, it's to do with ensuring that we understand exactly where industry and government are going. So let me move to the next slide, please, Fabi. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of 476 and where we leave things as they are at the moment. Niall is going to give us a detail of some of the technical issues around this standard, and then I'm going to cover what we are doing in terms of the CPA approach to this problem, and hopefully leave some time for questions, as Fabi has suggested. So let's move on. So 476 has been around the industry for a very long time. It first appeared back in 1953, and many of you who have been in the industry for a long time will have used it and will know it very well. And it has been very much the backbone of some elements of fire verification and testing. So it's a crucial part of the industry, and it is not one thing, and that's an important message to get out to those who possibly are not quite that familiar with it. It actually has 33 parts, which is significant for one British standard. And I've identified there a number of parts over the years have been withdrawn, and so quickly they are part 0, 1, 2, 5, 8, 14, 15, 16, and 25 to 30 have all been previously withdrawn over the years. But that does leave us with a significant number of parts under the standard: 7, 11, 12, 20, 21, 22, 24, 31.1, and 33 are listed as effectively withdrawn, but that doesn't mean that they have stopped being used by industry and are still a significant part of the conversation that we go forward with. And certainly parts 3, 4, 6, 23 and 32 are listed as current. Now, many parts of the industry will be using different elements of those parts, whether they have been officially withdrawn or not, and find them very useful as we go forward. The consultation that sparked this discussion of a couple of months ago really identified a direction of travel that has been with us for some time. The previous edition of the AD focused on moving 476 from directly referenced into the back of the document, signalling a change of direction for the approved document. Having said that, it is important that we now look at exactly how those changes will affect industry and how we go forward with taking a step into perhaps a new direction for this standard. But nonetheless, we've got to be very careful about that. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we get further into this presentation. Fabi, can I have the next slide, please? So all parts listed as current are definitely used by industry, but several parts, as I said, that are withdrawn are still in use by industry. So there's an important issue there to recognise that, in fact, right across the whole standards arena, many standards go on to be used long after they are regarded as being current or officially listed by British standards. And that obviously has to do with the fact that custom and practice and momentum an investment, in fact, just ensure that those particular standards have a life long after their official designation has ceased. Now, several parts of 476 have some compatibility with the European standard, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with that, but I think Niall is going to just amplify some of those positions. But of course, crucially, they are not necessarily direct correlations between the British standard and the European standard, and that's when we start to get in the detail, and that's when we have significant problem. We also have some significant problem for those parts where there is no equivalent in the European standard. And that's quite crucial, because where there is no equivalent, if we are starting to move to a new world, which would see 476 being withdrawn from regulation completely, those particular product sets are in a particular no man's land. Then we don't have an officially recognized test, don't have an officially recognized standard to work against the test. And so therefore, that's the kind of issue that the CPA want to flag up well ahead of any changes, and make sure that certainly all those parts of government that are driving the policy and looking at change are well aware of the implications for industry. And that's where I draw the parallel with our old friend CA Mark, that we have been working towards trying to find a solution for now 2.5 years. And the problem that we have with UK CA Mark is one of transition. If we are moving to that, we need to have a smooth plan that fits with the policy requirements, but that industry can cope with. And this is exactly the same situation that we're starting to see with this situation with 476. So I think that's the really important elements that I wanted to flag up. If I can now ask Niall to enter the discussion, and we will come on to the CPA approach to things a little bit later. So Fabi, can I ask you to bring up Niall's slides, or can I ask you to flip over to Niall?
Sure, I will stop sharing the slides and Niall can share his slides.
That's it. Sorry about that. That's the technology not working for us today, but normally it's smoother than that. So Niall, over to you.
Okay, you should have a slide with a heading slide, government consultation, removal of BS476, and a CPA logo in the bottom left-hand corner. This means it's working.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I have 3 screens here, and occasionally they kind of jump around. Well, good morning, all of you, and it's a pleasure to be here on this CPA webinar. And I'm going to talk about the withdrawal of 476. It's a subject I hold dear to my heart, having grown up with it, man and boy, but also having drafted a lot of the European standards that will take over from BS476. So on the one hand, I can see it's a technically better environment to move to the European standard, but it will cause a lot of headaches in the proposals that the government put forward. So without further ado, I'll go on to the next slide. Now, the first thing is, this is with an English consultation. It was only talking about England. So what about all the devolved administrations? A bit of a mixed picture, as you can see there. Wales is expected to follow England. Scotland have already removed BS476 for reaction to fire test. That's how materials burn rather than fire-resisting elements like doors and walls, etc. And they're waiting on the England consultation result before changing fire resistance. Northern Ireland, well, nothing's happening in Northern Ireland until they get a functioning government again. So there's nothing happening there. Republic have kind of jumped the gun a bit and already have a new draft Part B guidance. They use the same letters A and B as we do, which is removed 476 and is replaced with classification to the relevant part of EN 13501, and their consultations open for a wee while. So a bit of a mixed picture on the devolved administration. So there's 2 areas basically. There's reaction to fire, which uses the old terms like non-combustible and Class O and Class 1, etc. And they're being replaced. Those test methods are being replaced with European test methods and a European classification method, EN 13501 Part 1, and they're what's called the Euro classes. Part of the desire for that is due to the Grenfell fire and the use of Class O and all the hullabaloo surrounding that. I'll just leave it at that moment. So they kind of want to get rid of that, and I can understand that, and there's a good reason for that. The other issue is with fire resistance, which is again moving to British Standard 476 fire resistance tests, 2 EN 13501 parts 2, 3, 4, depending on the element, classification standards. So fire resistance tests or performance is expressed in minutes of fire resistance. And this has been, to use the phrase, the direction of travel by Department of Levelling Up, Communities and Housing for about 20 years, since I first started writing the European standard. And this issue was discussed, and it's been put in various parts of ADB. And as Peter said, the emphasis is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. The issues, there are a number of issues. The main ones are for fire resistance, but for any one of them, there's a transition period. Obviously, if we just said, right, it's happening tomorrow, then that's going to give quite a problem for a lot of industry. Whereas if we say, well, we could stay in 5 years' time, that gives people time to move. So transition covers all of it. But the implications mostly are on fire resistance. And it's a classification-based system as opposed to just tests. And I will explain the difference between them. The role of assessments, where you have an opinion of a product or service, a product or installation, and how it would perform if it were tested. Severity of fire tests and cost. And of course, it impacts on different sectors in a different way. So on a little word about classification, there is designed to be a way of expressing the fire performance. It's a bit of a mess what we've had in the UK. But people say, well, we're going to remove the British classes. Well, we don't really have any British classes for fire resistance apart from fire does. We have periods of fire resistance expressed in approved document B. On reaction to fire, we do have classes. Some are in the actual test method. And like, for example, BS476 Part 4 and BS476 Part 7, spread of flame, where you get results classes 1, 2, 3, 4. And some of them are not there. Some of them, like Class O, the ubiquitous Class O, is defined in approved document B. So we're kind of moving over this slightly ad hoc arrangement to a classification method. This is very much what we call European thinking. When this all first kicked off about 15 years ago, the UK was, we lived without classification for fire resistance for many years, but it was very much, we were like outvoted 27 or 24 to 1. They said, no, we're going down this route, so we did it. So the first one you got there, REI 60. That means R is load bearing capacity, E is integrity, and I is installation. And that, whatever it is, door, column, door, wall, will satisfy those criteria for 60 minutes. It's a kind of rounding exercise, and you get a nice little number at the end of it. And the one below it is Euro Class B, so that's kind of the reaction to fire rating, and S is the smoke production, and D is the production of flaming droplets. We don't use the suffixes S2 and D0 in ADB, but you should be aware that they're there. But we have a classes A to E, depending on, you know, A being the best and E being the worst, and so on. The thing about classes is they don't just consider systems, and they can't deal with end use application. They're classes of products as they come out of the factory, not a class of product as it's installed in a building. And that's, I'll come on to that when I move and specifically talk about fire resistance. But it's a currency. I think they call it technically common language for basically moving products across Europe. So with reaction to fire, with replacements with the Euro classes, in general, what we see, there's less resistance, or should be less resistance to change, because the classification process on 13501 is fairly straightforward. The tests are relatively cheap. I'm waiting for the howls from the audience there. Assessments aren't used, and the severity is largely similar. That's a bit of a gross generalization, but you know, non-combustible is class A1, and at the other end you've got an ignitability test, which is, you know, Euro class E. So you've got a similar sort of range. And it says there radar 2 program. That was a technical program of testing products back to back, EN test to British standard test to compare results. The government proposed a 12-month transitionary period, and that's liable to need extending, or may need extending. As I said, the tests are quicker and easier and cheaper to do I'm not aware of any great opposition to the proposal, but we'll see. I think it is the smaller problem to crack, if I'm honest with you, of the two. So I'm going to major on fire resistance. And of course, here the periods of fire resistance are expressed in terms of minutes of fire resistance. And the proposal is to determine it by European test methods only. So there's 4 issues there. 2 of them are grayed out for the moment. I'm going to do with the top 2 first. The implications of a classification-based system as opposed to a test-based system, and the role of assessments. And just to refer that again, when I do a test, right, I've got this pen in front of me, I can measure it, and I get the result, and let's say 150 millimeters. That's a test result. And the classification is what you do with that result in terms of either selling it in the market or in terms of satisfying a regulatory requirement. So testing is purely laboratory testing. Classification is for a currency, if you like, for exchanging product. So currently we have an existing British system. This is the flowchart on the left-hand side, where manufacturers can undertake fire tests to British standard. And you see on the left, on the arrow, that can go straight down and satisfy the provisions of approved document B. You notice I haven't used the word satisfied the classes of ADB, because ADB doesn't use classes apart from fire does. So you can use your test and you can go, so you can get 30 minutes fire resistance on a fire door or on a beam or a column, and you satisfy the provision. Great, fine. But all elements, whether it's doors, beams, columns, penetration seals, linear joint seals, come in a variety of sizes and shapes. It's impossible to test them all. It is just impossible. It's simple as that. You'd be forever doing it. So you might do more fire tests and go straight to the provision of ADB, or you use the box in the middle, which is marked assessment stroke expert judgment. And that's the system we've been using. And their assessment is the written opinion of an expert, normally the staff of a UCAS accredited laboratory that undertake the test, but also can be some fire consultants and fire engineers. It's their opinion if that was tested. And that has the advantage of not only covering a range of products, so you can interpolate between the smallest one and the largest one, but you can extend the product range, you can cover different configurations and so on and so forth. And this has been established practice for at least 30 years, and generally by and large the system works well. We have a code of practice for undertaking them, which is the PFPF guide for undertaking assessments of fire tests. So we use assessments to fill in the gaps. We can interpolate and extrapolate product ranges, covers the end-use applications not covered by testing. That's something that classification fails to do. Thousands are done by the labs and industry. And you may say, what are industry doing assessment? Industry do lots of assessment, and they're called engineering judgment. And the reason is, and as a former laboratory employee, I was kind of, this is not independent, but who knows the product better than the industry, than the manufacturer who made it? Often the manufacturer will say, this is my engineering judgment, go and get it checked with a third-party certification body or laboratory. But it's a good system, and it works, and it's flexible. Now, we're now going to move on to the European system that asks for classes, as given in the proposal. The diagram is quite simple. So you do your fire test to your European standard, but you notice there's no direct arrow down to the provisions of ADB. You have to go either by something called extended application, which I'll explain in a minute, or you classify to EN 13501. And the classification bit is a rounding process. It's this reduction of the test results, which are often quite complicated, into a code. So, for example, if you have a fire resisting wall that does 72 minutes low bearing capacity, 69 minutes insulation and integrity, and 62 minutes insulation, that will be classified as REI 60. So you round down to the nearest periods, and there are periods like 30, 45, 90, 60, 120, etc. That's the classification process. So you can put a number of tests in, and you can get a classification, and you can satisfy ADB. But that's still doing loads and loads and loads of tests. And as we see with the British system, that's not viable. So we need to do something to cover the ranges, to interpolate and extrapolate. And that's where extended application comes in. And extended application, it's like an assessment, but it's not flexible. What it is, it's a European standard developed in SEM, and it allows changes to the test results, changes the applicability based on rules, and there might be interpolation or extrapolation rules, but they're often very, very limited compared to what we would normally do. Agreed expert judgment, that is in other words where experts agree a rule or agree a judgment and it's written down in the standard. It's not allowing expert judgment. And calculation methods, obviously the standard will contain a calculation method you follow and you can extend the height of a petition or whatever. Now, this sounds very good, but in reality, it's a very rigid and conservative system. There's no room for expert judgment and no role for assessments. So all this covering of end-use application is going to be difficult. A point was raised at a recent CPA meeting. It also freezes out the use of ISO, international standards, and other standards. In older versions of ADB, the idea was, I've got a fire door, I've got a fire test done in Italy to Uni 9305 or UL 10 or NFPA, I can't remember the number now, and ASTM 3008, 3009. The number of standards that are well used, can't we use them? Not anymore. You are now stuck, frozen into the European system, which calls up almost exclusively European test methods and a few ISO ones here and there. In some cases, the extended application standard is not written, or it's unwieldy, or it's too restrictive. So it will severely affect product type and availability, the main thing being a restriction in the numbers of products. As Peter indicated earlier, there are some places where there are products that actually, there are standards that don't exist. So potentially, it's a big issue. It could be a solution out of this. One way out of this would be to say, we'll use the European tests, fine, but we won't do the classification bit. So in other words, it's a kind of, you see in the diagram there, you have your European tests, you can do your XAP, you can go, you can classify, and then you can get a provision, or you can do a European test and feed that into the assessment loop. And that way, you get European tests, which is, you know, in that respect quite good because they're better tests. It also means you're doing testing for any potential exporting you might want to do to Europe. And then you can also use assessments to fill in the gaps. It's a flexible system. There's room for expert judgment, and it bypasses the extended application standards, which either aren't written or are too unwieldy. The box in there shows you other member states do for this, do this quite similar. They have similar sorts of provision where the rigid classification system is not flexible enough. Okay, the other issue I'll mention briefly is severity of fire tests and costs. I mentioned earlier on the reaction to fire side, they're all fairly straightforward. On the fire resistant states, that's not quite the same. And that mainly comes from the fact that industry discovered that if you do a fire test in a furnace in the UK and then did one in a different laboratory in Germany or Italy, you get a different result. And the reason is the furnaces are not the same. They're different boxes, different sizes, different fuels, different emissivity of lining. So we had this situation, even if you've got an identical element and tested it across Europe, you've got different results. Industry, of course, knows this result. So we looked at replacing every furnace in Europe, and we decided that would be, we wouldn't do that. So we then invented something called the plate thermometer, which is designed to harmonize the exposure. And so in the change of severity, we use this plate thermometer. This is written into European standard. It works in a slightly different basis. Not enough time to talk about here, but it's more responsive to radiation and convection. And then the Radar 1 report, which is a research program that I ran on behalf of the government, DLUC, as it was then, and we did testing back-to-back, 60 products. And the reason it was they were considering, well, look, we're going to bring European standards into ADB, if we think we're good people, good Europeans, and we're going to do that, and we've been asked to do it, and we've agreed to do it. If we do that, if I ask 30 minutes for BS476, am I asking 30 minutes for EN Why am I asking 25 minutes? And there was discussion in the group about having parallel tables of classification, and we all thought, no, don't do this, it's too hard. What we found is a reduction in the fire resistance performance. It's 5 to 20%. That's a bit of a range. 20% sounds more frightening than it is, but the average reduction being about 10%, which means to get the same performance, if you're going to ask for European tests, the product has to be better, which means it's going to cost more. So there'll be a cost on the basis of that. And it could go on to that, whether it's more intumescent strips or better ironmongery or more coating or thicker doors. There's a number of ways. Industry reckoned that they would rise to the challenge. I say this is 20 years ago this was done. And so that's the way it was left. The approved document came in and it allowed satisfaction of the provisions of ADB with European tests. No classifications at that time. Okay, so it's a tougher test, what I'm saying, and it will cost more. So look at the last couple of slides, the implications on the sector with the withdrawal of BS476. For intumescent coatings or intumescent paint, we currently use what is called BS loading, British Standard Loading. A loading is how much paint you apply. If you switch to the EN test, because steelwork is one of the elements that's actually affected much more by the plate thermometer, the loadings will increase 20 to 30%. And some of the higher fire resistance period, you won't be able to use that protection method. You'll have to use something else, like boards or sprayed. They expect a small increase in thickness. Probably doesn't affect them as much. Now, fire stopping, which is, of course, one of the most popularly discussed elements. This industry grew up with EN testing. I use that phrase because I chair the UK National Committee, and back in the 90s, we said, shall we develop a British standards test for fire stopping? And we said, no, we won't, because we're in Europe and there's a European one, and we'll use that. So there's a lot more EN testing in the fire stopping industry. But having said that, they use the test results, they don't classify, and a lot of their third-party certification schemes are based on British standards. So that's all. There's a bit of a problem there, but it's probably less than some. Fire resisting duct, about half and half, and again, they're not classified to EN, they just use the test result. Smoke control, this is where it gets interesting. There is no extended application for smoke control ducts, which means you can have a duct of those dimensions given there, 1250 by a meter by or a meter in diameter, and no more. You can't make them bigger because they're not, you can't classify them bigger. You can't assess them bigger because there's no rule for assessments in classification. So that's the kind of element of restriction you get. And so this goes quite across the piece. There's quite a lot of disruption, some more than others. The biggest one is probably the fire door and ironmongery industry. And this partly is the nature of the industry. A lot of the companies I've mentioned before, fire stopping companies, particularly the paint companies, the intumescent paint, they're multinationals. They already export to Europe. They might use BS loadings for UK. They use EN loadings elsewhere. They can tweak and twist. With the fire door industry, we have what we have fire door sets here, but we have what we use more as what's called fire door assemblies, where fire door is often assembled on site from a multitude of different components. And that allows architects a tremendous range of bespoke doors and bespoke performances. It's far more flexible than the door set approach. But because of that, that industry is bespoke, it's local, and it uses BS476 as a testing. To use the European test to do it the same way would be a huge amount of retesting. This sector it doesn't export, it just sets the UK, but it's, fire doors is 700 million a year in the UK. It's over half of all passive fire protection, which is about 1.4 billion, 1.2 billion. The last figures I've got, it's probably more than that now. So it's a big sector. I put in the last bullet point, BS476 protection. It kind of protects the market because European door manufacturers, obviously they've tested to the European standard, they're going to have to test to the BS test to get the same advantage, to have the same severity to be able to compete with the UK one. but it's a big impact. The farther one is probably the one that will be affected the most. So to sum up, if we go through this on a 1-year transition period using demanding classification, it will lead to chaos. There are ways around it. There are ways of not demanding the classification route and just using the testing route, and we can have a longer transition period. And you've got to remember, the whole point of classification, the whole point of European standards was to allow free movement of products in the single market, which we're not a member of anymore. So you've got to think, well, why? Is it, the need to do it? When I was chairing the British Standard Committee, to force this through and get them to agree, I said, look, keep your eyes on the prize. The prize is one test for Europe and the single market. Well, that's gone now. So whatever you're feeling on Brexit. So because of that, start with the reason we did it is questionable. Having said that, as I've said earlier, the tests are better. It's been the direction of travel. I think it's the way we should go, but not quickly. And you've got to have a long transition period and think it through. I think that's me finished. Thank you.
On now is just, so where are the CPA taking this? We have from the beginning we've said we need to identify all the problems from all parts of the industry. If there's one thing we've learned in the CA mark journey, it's been about ensuring that we actually have clear information about all aspects of the potential change. So we are currently collecting information and we've got quite a lot. We've had, as you would probably gather from Niall's presentation, we've had a lot of information from the door sector, from the ironmongery sector, and from the passive fire protection sector. We want to clearly identify what those problems mean, and so we're producing a spreadsheet that relates each of the parts of BS476 to the particular feedback that we've had from industry, and we hope that that will help everybody understand those particular positions. And in particular, of course, we want to make sure that all government departments and all policy makers are aware of all those crucial issues. We then want to identify, as Niall has very clearly laid out in his presentation, identify potential solutions, some of which are complex, some of which are not straightforward. And then we would like to ensure that those can be put together, and we want to try and publish and agree a route map. And that route map obviously will need to identify exactly what needs to be done by government and exactly what needs to be done by industry. And the crucial part for that, as we've mentioned several times during this presentation, it is what is the transition period? And that transition period has got to allow for the practicalities. And one of the things that is concerning us from the information that we've got so far, as Niall referenced, we've got a potential year transition that's been identified in the consultation. A year will be not nearly long enough for those areas where no equivalent exists, and therefore we need to have clear understanding of how we move from where we are now into the future position. That in turn needs to have some agreed milestones in it. And so our clear objective is to make sure that all of that comes together with a smooth transition for everybody. Currently, the construction industry is subject to a number of really crucial issues that are causing a huge drag on improved performance, improved productivity. Government is seeking better growth, certainly from an industry like the construction sector. All of these issues are causing a dead weight around construction. We are already grappling with inflation, with increased fuel prices, certainly still some parts of the industry suffering from raw material supplies and, shall we say, problems across the global supply chain. this is just another issue that is adding to that problem and adding to the industry's ability to deliver the houses, the hospitals, the schools, the prisons that are so desperately needed. So can I have the next slide, please, Fabi? So, as I say, we are gathering information for industry. We are trying to identify the situation very clearly and make sure that industry and government are aware of all those particular concerns. Our objective is a smooth transition. We need to identify where there is a technical change that's driven by potentially removing 476, what that is and how we address it. And of course, in some areas, as we've heard, we might end up with a need to create a new standard and a new test. And as quite a few of you on the call, I'm sure, will be aware, that isn't a short or simple or cheap process. Our current estimate from the information that we've got so far is that for the worst case areas, we would need 5 years in order to smoothly arrive at this transition. And so it is crucial that we make everybody aware of these issues and make sure that we can identify them as we go forward. So I hope that has been a help to everybody. I hope it's been of interest, and I hope also you can see from that clearly the position that the CPA are trying to take in terms of helping discuss the situation, helping to identify and tease out the detail, and of course make sure that we can work with government in terms of where the particular future it leads us to in this topic area. So I'm going to stop there. I think there was a holding slide at the end, Fabi, and then maybe we've got time for some questions.
Okay, so we have quite a few questions here. I'll start from the top, and if we run out of time, I'll send those questions to both Niall and Peter, and they can get back to you. First question, as approved document B already explicitly requires classification, and there is no such thing as British class. Surely it is already a case that there could be legal challenges to anyone using BS476. The current BS476 allowance is only for products that may be legally on the market, and this has no definition. Well, this is not really a question, but do you want to give a comment on that?
Yeah, certainly I'll lead off and then ask Niall if he wants to come in. I think the important thing is that 476 is still referenced in the AD, and we've seen that some products just don't have a choice. So it's a case of that's the way we've been progressing, but clearly the linchpin in this is if the standard is officially completely withdrawn. Maybe I can just pass over to Niall now just to comment on the issue about classification. Niall, please.
Yeah, I think the easiest way is actually just to share that and show you there, for example, is a table B3 from approved document B. So, for example, it's got a classification in terms of European classes, alternative minimum provisions when tested the relevant part of 476. So we used to just have these periods of fire resistance, and now we have the class. So you've got this dual system at the moment. So you can still use BS476. A reaction to fire, it's much more down the road, as it were. But for fire resistance, you can still use 476, and most people do.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Fabi, next question, please.
It seems from the reaction side of the standard post-Grenfell is tainted, whilst fire test, e.g. for doors, is still fit for purpose. BS476 part 22 cannot depth leveling up except a change of BS name from 476 to answer BS name to dissociate itself and retain good parts of the current fire resistant for door industry. It's a bit confused.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm not sure if I really understand the question. Niall,
I can answer that.
Good.
The answer is yeah. Basically saying 476 has some associations with Class O, etc., because it covers everything, reaction to fire and fire resistance, and the good bits, can't we rename them? Basically, it'd be easy to put a new number on the standard. Unfortunately, although we might not be part of the EU, we're still part of CEN and still want to be part of CEN to influence European standards. CEN has something called standstill, which means if there's a CEN standard on measuring the length of this pen, this is my example again, the UK standard on measuring the length of this pen cannot be worked on. So we cannot work on BS476, which is why in your intro, Peter, you had a load of them that were withdrawn but are still used. They're withdrawn because officially we can't work on them because of standstill. But other than that, changing the number, yes, we could do something.
That's great, Niall. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. What happens if an industry has historically taken it upon itself to provide a test result for its products when placed in the market, testing to surface spread of flame to remain best standards, but there is no regulatory requirement within the product-specific area of application to actually provide a fire test result?
Niall, can I hand that one to you as well?
I struggle. I've read this question. I've seen the questions come up, and I've been looking at it thinking, I don't really understand the question. But if an industry has used a test like the spread of flame test to maintain standard, but no regulatory requirement between the product specific area, and maybe are they referring to a product standard that might call up a test method? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question. Perhaps if the questioner types another one in at the bottom, we might get around to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I could say though that surface spread of flame, and particularly Class 0, has always been a difficult area. It simply by the way that Class 0 is actually derived and defined, makes it very difficult to make sure that all parts of industry understand it and apply it equally. And certainly I've come across that in my previous...
It used to be simple when it was a low level one, and then they added this double definition with including with non-combustibility. And I remember at that time I thought, this is going to confuse people. Yeah. And then of course the issue, because there's some comments in the questions about the scenario, was that the approved document B had restrictions for the use of combustible material or non-combustible material, and the infamous filler word was the core and ACM panel. And by industry, whatever reason and however, interpreted that correctly as it is, that could be used, and therefore combustible materials, which were never intended to be used as the core of an ACM panel, were used. And this is agreed because DLUG has agreed to fund all the cladding remediation above 18 meters. So, that's not, the guidance wasn't clear. And if the guidance isn't clear, people will make mistakes with it.
Yeah, sadly, yes.
Thank you.
You've got time for another question?
Yeah, we do. We have a lot of questions and we still have many people online. So if you want, we can go ahead for another maybe 10 minutes instead of 5.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Concerns around willingness to use judgment in current UK atmosphere. There is also an amount of capacity. Assessments are now taking much longer than testing. How do we expect this to progress?
So if I can just lead with that, this is exactly the point that I was making in drawing a parallel between this issue and the UK CA mark. The two are very similarly linked, with the UK's reduced ability to test and certify. One of the solutions that we've been putting forward on the CA mark side of things is to still allow European, in fact, actually test bodies further afield than Europe to provide testing and certification inputting into UK industry, and in that way we would still have that worldwide ability available for industry, and I see if we go forward with some of the changes to 476, then the potential answer in dealing with this is to allow product manufacturers to use and source certification and testing from anywhere where they have the appropriate quality certified to undertake that procedure. Niall, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's this concerning around the willingness to use judgment. I did mention there is a code of practice for undertaking assessments that's actually now covered in, it's now referenced in approved document B. So the idea that you can write on a piece of paper, I think it's okay, isn't good enough. You know, you have to do that. To be an assessment, you have to be a member of staff for UCAS accredited laboratory. The code of practice defines the type of assessments and the level of assessments, from easy ones, I want to move that screw from there, to I want to cover this range of fire protection thicknesses. It covers the levels of those and education and requirements of those undertaking assessment. There's declaration by the applicant. You've got primary and secondary test evidence. We spent a lot of time writing this, because when I worked for a certification body and a test laboratory before I worked for the ASFP, a lot of time getting this right. What we found is it wasn't used as widely as we thought, but that's better. Capacity assessments should be okay, because they're relatively, certainly better than test capacity. If they're taking longer than testing, I would suggest that is reticence on the part of some assessing. Those bodies that do assessments have drawn their horns in and are less willing to, in this kind of litigation post-grant, they're less willing to make an assessment now. So then we lead to problems on site.
Yeah.
Thanks, Niall.
Thank
I think we have time for other two questions, maybe. Do we know what will happen to the validity of existing BS476 testing that is currently valid up to 2026?
Well, I think that the thing there is crucial. It is, what is the transition program, and so that is exactly the kind of point that we want to make very clear to government, to ensure that all of these different aspects are taken account of in any transitional process. And again, it takes me back to the point, our aim is to ensure that there is a smooth transition, and that has got to be one of the factors that's built in. Not any further point?
No, not really. I mean, I was interested to know why 2026. I don't understand the significance of that date.
No, I didn't pick that up.
It's not too critical. I was just wondering why that was there. But yeah, I mean, it's still valid until the government sends ADB and says it's not, or if not approved document. Don't forget, approved document B is statutory guidance. It's not actually. The requirements are given within the functional statements in the building regulations. Yeah.
Good reminder. Thank you very much. Yeah. So focus on the green bit. Okay, Fabi, one more.
Yeah, is there any question you've seen that you'd like to answer yourself, or shall I go just with one random one?
No, just pick one as we start to round up. Yeah, thank you.
Would CPA publish an article or document to give clarity to the designers with regards to the transition and validity of the BS476 test? As there are few manufacturers who are giving wrong messages to the specifiers saying BS is not valid.
Oh, Well, yeah, certainly on the cards is some CPA guidance, and you know, we've been on this case since the consultation came out. This webinar, I would say, is not going to be the last on this topic, and we will certainly want to try and keep people informed as the story unfolds. I think we're slightly premature at the moment to be producing some specific guidance. It is regrettable if there's false information floating around the industry, and of course I'll go back to the point that that's why we are developing and gearing up the Code for Construction Product Information, because that will stop that kind of uncertainty in the information that's produced. But yes, in the medium term, there will be further CPA guidance coming forward.
I just add in very briefly that
please.
This kind of disinformation we saw when manufacturers said, oh, you've got to have CE marking, even when there wasn't a product standard which requires CE marking. It's, oh, you've got to have CE marking in this testing. And we thought, no, that's not actually the case. You know, the number of passive fire protection products that actually require CE marking is very small.
Thanks, Niall. Yeah, so we're very keen to make sure that there is clarity in the marketplace and, of course, a level playing field. So that's absolutely crucial. So thanks very much for that, Niall. Fabi, I think we're probably at the end of our time now.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to thank everyone for participating to this webinar. It got a lot of attention, so as Peter mentioned, we will probably have some more webinars on the topic, and hopefully there won't be as much technical issues as today.
Hope so.
If you have any further questions or comments, you can share them with me and I will forward them to Niall and Peter, and I will also get the questions from the Q&A and share them with them. If you are interested in joining CPA, please have a look at our website and feel free to get in touch with me. Finally, again, the recording of this webinar will be available over the next 48 hours on the CPA website. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.